Welcome back to Buckeyes Now on Sports Illustrated. We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State in Game 1 of the 2021 season. And that it was certainly a game that had some heart-stopping moments, especially in the first half. But by the end, the Buckeyes figured out a way to just accomplish the mission that they had set out by any means possible, figure out a way to win the first game of the year. And Ohio State is coming back to Columbus with a victory, 45-31. I'm Brendan Gulick, joined tonight by Andrew Lind, Brett Hiltbrand, and Adam Prescott, all of whom have contributed here this week leading up and certainly covering the game tonight. Guys, why don't we kind of start around the room here and just share some opening thoughts on the game. I'll get us started. I thought C.J. Stroud in the first half had a couple of moments that didn't look so good, but I was really impressed with the play calling early in the second half to get him comfortable, back into a rhythm. The Buckeyes didn't panic, and they kind of figured out a way to just keep going one play at a time. And by the end of the game, it ended up being a fairly comfortable 2-touchdown win.
Yeah, to kind of go off of that point, there was a point where I thought that, after Stroud threw the interception, that maybe they might consider, changing it up a little bit on offense. But I was glad that they stuck with him and let him kind of go through those growing pains. And then obviously that paid dividends in the future or later on in the game, because he turned around and had some spectacular touchdown passes after that.
Brett, go ahead, man.
I think we can go ahead and officially say Ryan Day is a better second half coach than Urban Meyer ever was and probably ever will be, right? I think that's fair. I think they looked at what kind of Minnesota was offering as far as, that late bail and getting that third DB back there and realizing that guys could kind of get lost underneath. And we see the result of that with pretty much easy touchdowns there, both with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. I think maybe C.J. Stroud, the bar is high for an Ohio State quarterback coming in, regardless of what you've shown previous to getting those first snaps. And so when it didn't necessarily look as sharp and as flashy as maybe, we were expecting and maybe fans have been accustomed to over the last couple guys who have gone in there with basically no experience and really shine bright pretty fast. When it didn't look that way early, I think maybe there was a little bit of panic setting in, but you can't argue with the end results. And those stats are pretty impressive. You hit 4 home runs for touchdowns, basically, which is unbelievable. I think the big plays were massive, and there's some very big issues on the other side of the ball for sure. But I think offensively, it looks like in part that this is an explosive Ohio State attack, and I think that was something that we anticipated coming into the year.
Yeah, I think for me, 2 things. One, Vegas knows what it's doing. Ohio State closes 14-point favorites. They win by 14. Those guys in Sin City have nice chandeliers for a reason. Secondly, I think you could say I thought Minnesota arguably, had the best player on the field and had a pretty good game plan in terms of slowing the game down, going to ride their big gun and milk the clock. Obviously, unfortunately got injured, for the Golden Gophers. But in the end, I don't think it mattered. Ohio State, 4 scoring touchdowns over 50 yards. They had another one that was 36 yards to Olave. In the end, the talent's going to win out. So as good of a game plan as Minnesota had, and as well as they were executing that for roughly 3 quarters, as Brett said, that, the haymakers just eventually won out. And, if Ibrahim does, or Ibrahim, I can't even pronounce it now. It's got me second guessing everything I know about, all that. But I don't know how it would have played out over the fourth quarter had he not gone down. I thought Minnesota had a really nice game plan and had a lot of things working in their favor, but Ohio State just has too many horses.
I think if you'd have told me at halftime that C.J. Stroud would finish the game 13 of 22 for 294, 4 touchdowns and a pick, I mean, I guess I would have, thought it was possible because what the wide receiving room can do, but it would have taken a significantly better, level of productivity from Stroud in that second half. I think part of the frustration, at least for me, guys, when watching CJ, he just kind of missed some open targets. I mean, there was just not a great rhythm in the first half. So I was glad to see that at least, look, the home run pass to Wilson on that post route where he made the safety look totally silly is a perfect pass. Obviously, the screen pass, CJ threw a good pass, but he didn't really do much of the work on the 71-yard score. Same deal with the Chris Olave play. I mean, he made a good intermediate throw, but Olave did most of that with his legs. And that's just kind of how I feel about this offense right now is, if you're CJ, take a deep breath, get the ball in space to some guys that are really, really athletic and let this offense do its thing.
He kind of mentioned that too, that he wasn't really fully comfortable in the first half, and that's understandable considering he hadn't thrown a college pass so far. And the fact that, one of the things that wasn't really talked about as much as maybe it should have been was really the impact that the crowd had on the game. It was really just a very different scenario than what he'd seen since he'd been in college, because all of last year that did not exist. So for him to come into that situation and get his nerves under him and just kind of learn as the game goes on was impressive to see. But I think the one thing that stood out to me was just, on those passes in the first half, he was putting a little bit more into it than maybe he needed to. And then just, once he did settle down, that's when the completion percentage ended up coming up. So, I mean, he finished with 59% completion percentage, which is probably a little bit lower than I expected he would have had. But if you look at the course of the game, I think he got better as he went on.
AJ Hirsch is jumping in here, and if you're watching live with us and you want to join the conversation, please do. Let us know your thoughts or concerns about the game. We'll try to address those. Brett, why don't we start with you? AJ says, curious on your take on the rotating personnel throughout the game, specifically on the run game defense. That was definitely a common theme.
Dude, I mean, at some point you kind of lost track who was out on the field, right? I think I stopped. I literally halfway through maybe the fourth series, it was kind of, I'm done trying to keep track of who's coming in and who's coming out and trying to kind of put a finger on the reasoning for which personnel was in the game at that time. This game felt very scripted to me in both personnel, but also play calling. And I think we saw a little bit of what happens when that scripting gets, when the game goes off script and you have to ad lib a little bit. And you heard Joe Klatt mention that during the game, the idea of wanting to throw on your terms and how advantageous that is to an offense and to a new quarterback, especially. I think on defense too, there were times where it felt a little bit like you knew what Minnesota was trying to do, specific with just, in my opinion, fairly obvious, zone run plays, really. And then Ohio State had some weird personnel on the field during a couple of those. The personnel on the 4th and 1 call, I really don't understand that. That felt like Greg Schiano a couple of years ago, where it was the world's worst gap contain that we've ever seen. But yeah, I don't know. It's weird. I think in a lot of ways, maybe that was this coaching staff trying to figure out who can play, because maybe there isn't a ton of separation between the 1s, 2s, and 3s a little bit. And I think that's a risk that you take. It certainly, I think it's a risk when you're playing Minnesota, especially. I don't think it's maybe if you're playing Akron or someone like that. But shout out to Akron. But I kind of think maybe that's the deal here, is that they were trying to figure out, who they can trust, and they probably have a pretty good idea of who that is now.
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think one, you're trying to figure out who you can trust, and, throwing some guys in there first game of the season. The other part of it is that you have to give respect to your opponent. They're playing against a really good running back and a really good rushing attack. So, you got some new pieces, trying to figure out who you got. The first time I was looking at a roster, figured out wait, who's this number? Am I seeing this right? I just want to make sure I know who's in this spot, because I wasn't expecting this or whatnot. But they're playing against a good running back that had 160 some yards through three quarters. So, I think it'll get better as the season goes on. They're breaking in 8 new starters, I think, on the defense, and, a lot of games won in the trenches. So, yeah, the 4th and 1 was a tough play, and there was some other, plays that were tough. He got free, I think, on a 19-yard score over there in the third quarter that had me scratching my head a little bit too on a cutback. But rotating personnel too, I guess, on off. I know, AJ was asking about, defensive line, but even offensively, I thought they did a good job in the backfield, rotating in 3 backs. Mayan Master and then Trey Henderson, who's going to be a star, by the way. Just shifting over to the offensive side. One of my favorite interviews I did, this past year, talking to he and Evan Pryor together. Trey Henderson has a unique kind of combination of confidence but humbleness. He comes from a tough area, has worked himself out of that area, believes he's going to be a star. And that interview that we had was talking about, the ways he's going to manage his money when he's in the NFL and how he's going to get there and things like that. And, but he's humble, he's not ahead of himself either. You certainly saw that tonight a little bit, just incredibly dynamic. That kid's going to be the next big thing.
Well, he's definitely got a lot of confidence, but I too agree with that. I appreciate his humility. It's interesting though. You kind of inadvertently circled exactly where I wanted to go with the running back component to this. Boy, it's a lot easier to exhale after the game because it worked out fine and you won by 2 scores. But for a while there, it's worth scratching your head a little bit when you play 30 minutes, you're trailing at halftime. Mayan Williams got on the field to start the game because he had earned the chance to start, and he rips off a 71-yard touchdown run. And prior to that, he ran hard, and then he doesn't see the field for 3 more series. And so I understand it's early in the year. I like the fact that Ryan Day wants to play some depth. I guess I'm just a little bit more into that when you're playing Tulsa or Akron or a non-conference game that you can afford to do that. If the Buckeyes would have stubbed their toe tonight, I mean, you are talking about a major uphill climb to get into the college football playoff. So you just can't afford to lose, these kinds of games. I guess we lost Adam. We will get him back. But I guess I was a little bit confused when it came to the decision to take Mayan Williams off the field as quickly as they did.
Yeah, the fact that he went from scoring a touchdown to then you didn't see him until later in the first half was definitely a head scratcher. You kind of want to ride him at that point and say, like, he has a hot hand. He's clearly feeling good about himself, doing the right things, and you just ride that. But then at the same time, like, I understand why they would want to get, they even had Marcus Crowley in at some point too.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, like, have any of them actually separated themselves during fall camp? Like, are they all that even that you weren't exactly sure, like, who was going to get the majority of the snaps throughout the game? And, I would have kept Williams in just because he was already showing that he could, break off big runs. And it could be a little bit of respect to Master Teague, being the upperclassman, the returner, those kind of things where you want to get him involved. But clearly, Mayan was feeling it tonight, and he was the person who should have been on the field the most often.
Welcome back, Adam. I was just on a high horse about Mayan Williams and, surprised that he had such a hot start and then all of a sudden disappeared for, almost an hour.
Yeah. Sorry, no idea what happened there with my internet connection. That's strong. It's usually strong, but we're talking about pork chop, are we? Talking about pork chop?
Yeah, I mean, he's the kid is really fun to watch.
Yeah.
And maybe the Buckeyes, for all the talk around TreVeyon Henderson, and I think we all kind of agree with each other that Henderson's ceiling is really, really high, and maybe even better than that, he's got a really high floor. I mean, the expectation is that TreVeyon, can really, really be an elite back. There are some within the building right now that have said quietly that TreVeyon is ahead of where J.K. Dobbins was at this point in J.K.'s career. I mean, those are big shoes to fill, but maybe he's that next back. And still, it's Mayan Williams who has kind of had everybody going, hey, wait a second, maybe this room's even deeper than we realized.
Yeah, I think all of them are benefiting, playing behind a strong offensive line. They all have a little different kind of characteristics or a little different skill set. I personally, like I said, it's going to sound like I'm real pro TreVeyon Henderson right now. He might be the best back on the roster right now. I mean, and that might sound a little favoritism went up when you watch them in the explosiveness and just seeing them on kickoff returns a little bit. I mean, any back there is going to have some success in the system that they're throwing out there. But it's going to be fun to watch. It's fun to watch in terms of next man up or riding a hot hand or one guy goes down and you feel like you have some depth there. It'll be interesting to see how they attack Oregon next week. With again, Oregon's probably going to have the best player on the field, and this time, on a defensive line. So it's going to be interesting to see how that offensive line, turns out next week and what back ends up finding the most rhythm.
Brett, let's go defense here. You've got 2 freshman starting cornerbacks because Seven Banks was only available tonight in an emergency. Cam Brown did not make the trip, wasn't healthy enough to play. Thankfully, Lathan Ransom was not called for targeting toward the end of that game because he would have missed time next week, which would have really been painful. Thankfully, that didn't happen. Also, Taraja Mitchell at linebacker early in the game, flagged for targeting. It was reviewed and revoked. Josh Proctor got hurt late in the game. Hopefully he's okay. We don't know his injury status yet. It just feels like there's a lot of question marks after game 1, which was kind of the story of the season defensively last year too.
Yeah, tackling, I think, is the kind of number one concern right now. I think that DB group last season looked scared to tackle in certain situations, especially in scenarios where an opponent's kind of running downhill at them. And I thought at times that popped up again in this game tonight. I'm really wondering a little bit if they're a little bit exposed just simply because of the game plan of run, and then, play action and then try and get guys, out into space basically for like high percentage throws and whether or not that really kind of suits this DB group's skill set a little bit. And that maybe they're better off with against opponents that, are maybe a little bit more balanced and how that can, kind of maybe flip a little bit of a switch because then their assignments are a little bit more straightforward. They're probably not playing, as much kind of like island man as you saw at times because of how much Ohio State had to load the box there. But it's weird. We talk, you've heard me say on the podcast before that like playing defensive back would be a nightmare. I mean, you saw in the 4th and 1 play, right? Like I think there was a combined 3 bad steps by the safety and that kind of like contain edge guy, and you're off to the races. Like it's so easy to get made for you to really look silly and just one bad step, hips in the wrong spot, can't get him around, all that kind of stuff. I think it's so hard, and also on top of that, when the rules are kind of slanted against you a little bit, and you're always going to favor the offense on pass interference and holds and all of that. So. It's a challenge. I think it's by far the most glaring issue that this team has, and we knew that probably coming into this season. I think Kerry Combs and company have their work cut out for them because it doesn't seem that it's a fundamental issue. In a lot of ways, I almost feel like it's a bit of a talent gap, and so I think they're going to have to manage that as the opponents get a little bit better.
Well, to your point too about the cornerbacks being on an island of sort, you might look back to like the old NCAA football video games where they would say like, if somebody dropped an interception, they'd say, oh, well, he's playing cornerback because he doesn't have the hands to catch the ball and play receiver. But I don't think that's necessarily true. Like I think that is more, you have to be a very special type of player to want to play cornerback just because of the challenges that are associated with it. And I don't think that point gets talked about enough. So then obviously once, Ohio State's missing their top 2 cornerbacks, they're thinking that they're going to be playing a team that is going to primarily run the ball, which we saw today. So that kind of allowed them to, rotate and stuff like that as much as they did in the first couple series. But,
right.
Like you said, I think that there's a lot of things that they could have learned from today's game, and they just kind of have to apply those moving forward. And then obviously getting, your 2 starting cornerbacks back whenever that happens will only benefit them.
I liked Cody Simon and Tommy Eichenberg in particular tonight. I thought Taraja Mitchell played fine. Obviously, Zach Harrison has the big strip sack, and sacks can really make a big impact in a game. Strip sacks can change the game entirely, and a fortunate bounce, the ball hits the ground, hits a player, and then just lands in Haskell Garrett's hands while he's running forward. I mean, like, if you're not watching the ball when that play happens, you're like, wait, where's he going? And then you realize he's got the ball and he's going to score. That kind of felt like the play that changed the game. So I don't want to totally hammer the defense because, they gave up 31 points and yeah, they had some bad moments, but I think you could also appropriately say, hey, an average of 4.1 yards per rush against a team that clearly tried to run it down their throats, 50 carries. You give up 203 yards on the ground over 50 carries. And by the way, 56 of those came on one play. So take the one big, home run play out of it if you don't break contain. And on that play, by the way, I remember there were basically two additional offensive linemen lined up on the left side behind the offensive line. They just tried to crush that left side and blow it open. It only needed a yard, and obviously the play, blew up. But all in all, I obviously the tackling was frustrating at times, but statistically the numbers weren't terrible. College football is an offensive game, and it's part of the reason why the Buckeyes have been so good now, because they hit a lot of home runs, for lack of a better way to say it. So I don't want to kill the defense, but it's easy to look at what happened last year, both during the regular season and then against Alabama, and recognize that's a huge focal point. And now look at where we are here week one and feel like, gee, maybe this effort is good enough to beat a lot of teams, but is it good enough to win a national championship? Feels like there's a long way to go between where they are now and where they want to be.
Yeah, it might be a little unfair, right? Because I feel like the tackling at times is not maybe like below average, compared to the rest of college football, but it does feel like in big downs, short yardage or plays in space, that a lot of times those tackles aren't made. And maybe that's why it feels like they stand out a little bit more, perhaps. The 4th and 1 play is a perfect example. They line up wrong incorrectly on that 20-some yard touchdown run. That was like a kind of a big moment in the game, right? And he basically goes untouched in the end zone. So, it's strange. I really don't quite understand the other thing too about like. Welcome back, Adam. Your Wi-Fi is.
I don't know.
Struggling in space as well tonight. It's like I don't know, how do you coach tackling now? Because you know what I'm saying, like you're like tackling like the foam circle thing now because you don't want to hit your guys, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, how do you do it? Like, you don't rep it. So I'm not necessarily surprised. I would guess if we sampled the last 10 years as far as like tackling efficiency, it's probably way down, right? Just because you're not able to practice it in the same way you used to.
There was actually a really cool drill that Ohio State was doing when we had like one of our various media windows, where basically the cornerback or the defensive back would up against the receiver, they'd stand back to back, and then they'd snap the ball. They'd run around a cone 5 feet in front of them, and then come back and try to tackle them. And it was kind of one of those things, like, you would notice consistently the wide receivers or the tight ends would constantly get the advantage there. And it was just like one of those things, like, I really think, to your point, that they just don't really practice, tackling in live situations as much as maybe they would like to. So then, like, once you're in those situations, there's not that muscle memory. You're not doing it as much. You don't, it's just not familiar anymore.
I guess it's that balance you try to strike of, you want to be physical enough, you want practice to be tough, but you sure don't want to put yourself at a disadvantage by not being 100% full strength, feeling like you don't have any, soft tissue injuries going into games when you play once a week. And with a bunch of really young guys, many of whom, didn't have spring ball last year or non-conference games last year, and maybe didn't see a lot of time on the field last year because the Buckeyes didn't play as much depth last season as it looks like they might try to play now. I just think that's something that we're going to have to keep an eye on. And one guy we really haven't touched on that I we absolutely cannot wrap up without talking about Jeremy Rucker. You want to talk about a dude that plays so hard and just knows where to be. He makes outstanding blocks. On Olave's first touchdown, that play was absolutely set up by Rucker making a great block. I continue to be so impressed with a guy who just is never going to get the headlines because, the receiver room is loaded and the running back room obviously has some flashy talent. But Rucker, he's a lunch pail guy, man. He just gets his job done. He doesn't need a lot of praise, and I think he is a huge, huge component to this offense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we're going to look at future projections, I think that he might be Ohio State's best pro in the future. Like, I think he has everything everything that Travis Kelce and Darren Waller have and more. And, I think that once he's a featured part of an offense, he can be that type of player. So, it doesn't show up right now because it's not what Ohio State asks of him or will ever ask of him. But I definitely think that he has that future potential.
Hard to evaluate, right? Like we're not getting the best, look at him. We're not necessarily seeing him at, the him maxing out the potential, right? So, I think it's almost like a thankless position to be a tight end at Ohio State right now, in a lot of ways. Like you're asked to, a lot of times hit probably the best big athlete on the team in the opponent's defensive end more often than not. You're a lot of times you're tip of the spear when it comes to blocking off edge, and you might get 3 targets, maybe. If that. Did he have 2 catches? I know he had the one big one in Spain.
That's it. 1 catch for 15 yards. Yep.
Yeah,
one catch, 1 target.
Yeah. So target maybe twice, 3 times, if that. But yeah, it's a thankless job, and I think you have to have the right personality to be able to do it and do it well, especially at Ohio State. And I think he's checking all of those boxes. That Mayan Williams touchdown, he's on the edge there. Now I think Mayan's supposed to run the other way. Just like if memory serves, the way everyone blocks there, I think Mayan's supposed to go off his butt, go left, and Mayan goes right.
He said that at the post-game press conference.
Okay, there you go. But you have all that space. It's wide ass open. You better go run. Beat one guy and go score a touchdown. But yeah, it's point of attack there a little bit. So yeah, it's full credit to him. Fair play to him. It's in that group that group I think does it the right way, and he's one of those guys that I think you hope to see it pay off. At the next level, right? That you all the dirty work, the paying the dues. You go to an NFL offense where that tight end's featured, go get paid, and go do it right there.
Let's wrap up with some final thoughts. Adam, we'll start with you in case your internet gets hit by another meteor or something.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to jump in on the DB conversation. I think it's a lot of, Brett was talking about the rotation on the defensive line. I think you're going to see a little bit of that. They got to figure it out next week against Oregon, but then they're going to have a couple weeks, some, Tulsa and Akron to figure it out. I think you're going to see a rotation of guys come in there and they'll kind of figure out what works for them by the middle of the season. But, guys like us are supposed to get on here and maybe overanalyze a little bit, but to put it in perspective, you're out there defending probably the fastest guy on the field. You're running backwards. He's running forwards. He knows where he's going. You don't know where he's going. And as Brett alluded, the rules favor him. You're not allowed to breathe on him. And if you touch, it's a foul. You can't even. You can't
even turn your back to the ball. You
can't do anything. So it's impossible. It's really hard to convince guy. I feel like to play defensive back these days. I thought there were some bright spots. You're going to see that sort itself out. I think they'll be good enough with the offense as good as it is. Those guys just have to be good enough. And I think they can get through next week with Oregon, which I think they will. By the way, I'm going to guess they're probably going to be about a 9-point favorite. If you ask me, I haven't seen a line yet. I'd guess they'd be about an 8 to 9 point favorite. And early thoughts, I think they'll cover that. That's neither here nor there. But once they get through that game, you have Tulsa and Akron to kind of figure some things out. I think the defensive secondary will be just fine. but it's fun to look at it now and figure out, what worked, what didn't.
Andrew, final thoughts from you.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the secondary, I think that they do have a lot to prove, and I don't want to make any real snap judgments after just 1 week when it comes to, you're coming into a Big Ten game right off the bat. You're bringing in several new starters, people who've never played before. But at the same time, it's hard to forget what happened last year, and it's hard to forget the situation that Kerry Combs inherited. Like, it's just, to me, he has a lot to prove as a defensive coordinator. Matt Barnes has a lot to prove as a secondary coach, and I think that, as the season goes on, there needs to be improvement in those positions, because if not, then that makes you wonder if there are changes that are needed.
Brett?
Adversity is a good thing. And I think for this team especially, that has a lot of unproven guys in big spots, to be able to kind of get those growing pains out of the way as early as possible can only be a positive for Ohio State football going forward. I think they actually checked a lot of the boxes that they were wondering about prior to, these combat snaps in this game. Quarterback, a shaky start, bounces back in a big way. My laundry's done. Sweet.
Nice.
I swear that happens every time we do this. You check that box as far as I'm concerned with that kind of gut check, trust level with CJ Stroud. You check the box with the running backs and being able to perform with guys who maybe you haven't seen a ton from yet. Your wide receivers, who, by the way, should be in the NFL right now.
Every single one of them.
No doubt, right? Like I saw a tweet. It was like, why is Chris Olave not in the NFL right now? Word, right? You check those boxes. Those guys are the same. That offensive line may be the best in the country. Love it, right? So and on top of that, you went down on the road in the Big Ten and you come back fairly emphatically. I think all in all, you checked every single box. It's a win across the board for Ryan Day, and that's good for Ohio State going forward.
Buckeyes, if I'm not mistaken, until literally the last couple minutes of the game when they decided to basically run the clock out, no receiver other than Olave, Wilson, and Smith and Jigba saw the field. I think Marvin Harrison got a couple snaps. Julian Fleming got a couple snaps. I don't believe Emeka Egbuka actually got in the game tonight. I might have missed that, but I don't believe that to be the case.
I think they averaged almost 19 yards per play in the second half before that final drive when they were just churning the clock out.
Well, here's a perfect way to back that up. Minnesota ran 75 plays for 408 total yards. The Buckeyes had 48 plays for 495 yards. Ohio State averaged 10.3 yards per play. Minnesota 5.4 yards per play. And Minnesota had 39 minutes time of possession, 21 minutes for the Buckeyes.
Didn't matter.
The Gophers, that's pretty much how you wanted to play the game. Control as much of the clock as you can, run the ball literally 50 times.
Didn't matter.
And it just didn't happen for them. So I think Ohio State deserves some credit for, as you put it, Brett, handling some adversity on the road, dealing with the fact that they weren't playing a perfect game, especially early on. They were trailing at halftime. Ryan Day didn't sound the alarm bell. Instead, he came out and put out the absolute perfect first drive. A one-play long touchdown drive as well backs that up, and then things start feeling like they're going. So all in all, I think the initial feeling for the group is a good one. The Buckeyes did what they needed to do, but they've got some things they need to work on before they play their one big non-conference game coming up on Saturday next week. Saturday, September 11th, Oregon will come to Ohio State, the 132nd season for Ohio State football, but maybe more importantly, the 100th year at the Horseshoe. And the first game at the Horseshoe this year is against the Oregon Ducks. For Andrew Lynn, for Brett Hiltbrand, and for Adam Prescott, I'm Brendan Gulick. Thanks for joining us. We've got a ton of coverage coming up this week. Have a great weekend. Enjoy your last Saturday without Buckeye football until the middle of October, and we'll see you real soon on Buckeyes Now.